Executive Chairman of the State of Illinois Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton. I am a revolutionary. Black people need some peace. White people need some peace. And we are going to have to fight. We're going to have to struggle. We're going to have to struggle resistantly. And why they want to get rid of me? Because I'm saying something that might wake up some other exploited people and some other oppressed people. We're going to have to do more than talk. We're going to have to do more than listen. We're going to even have to do more than learn. We're going to have to start practicing, and that's very hard. We're going to have to start getting out there with the people. And a lot of times we think we're better than the people. That's an insult, and that's criminal. And it's just, it's sort of like a primary thing with me. I'm the first move that they'll make.
This is 2337 West Monroe, described by police as a depot for Black Panther Party arms and ammunition. 14 state's attorney's policemen, led by Sergeant Daniel Groth, found out indeed it was a depot for weapons. After a 15-minute gun battle that cost Illinois Black Panther Party Chairman Fred Hampton his life.
As soon as Sergeant Daniel Groth and Officer James Davis, who were leading our men, announced their office, occupants of the apartment attacked them with shotgun fire.
Sir, you say your men were fired upon. Witnesses who have seen the apartment say there is no evidence of bullets from the direction where the Panthers supposedly were to be.
This blatant act of legitimatized murder strips all credibility from law enforcement. In the context of other acts against militant blacks in recent months, it suggests an official policy of systematic repression.
Anyone who went through that apartment and examined the evidence that was remaining there could come to only one conclusion, and that is that Fred Hampton, 21 years old and a member of a militant, well-known militant group, was murdered in his bed, probably as he lay asleep.
You are the ones who are going to decide for yourselves what happened in that apartment on the morning of December 4th. You're going to decide whether or not Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were the victims of premeditated murder.
Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm very honored to be here, and I also want to recognize Jefrrey Hampton, who is Fred Hampton's mother, who is here tonight. And also Bill Hampton, Fred's brother, and Dee Dee Hampton, Fred's sister. And Kechi Taifa, who was also in the apartment that night. In the book, she is referred to as China Doll or Brenda Harris, and she's here tonight also. I want to thank Northwestern and Bernadine for bringing together such a prestigious and accomplished panel. I feel a little bit like now to sit down and hear what they have to say. I'm really in awe of the people who are here tonight and their accomplishments and their writing. And I want to thank Bernadine for putting it together and for being one of the inspirations for why I wrote this book. It was, Bernadine mentioned that Fred Hampton spoke at Northwestern University Law School almost exactly 40 years ago to the day. And the person who introduced him was a young law student by the name of Flint Taylor, who's sitting in the front row. And apparently, I wasn't there, but Flint sort of stammered through an introduction of Fred. So when Fred got up, he chided Flint and said, well, Flint, you better get it together. But he also knew that Flint had helped him get out on appeal bond. And as you know, Flint's gotten it together, and I don't want to spend the rest of the night talking about his accomplishments, but anyway, another person who was very much touched and moved by Fred Hampton. If you had told me a few years ago that I would be standing here talking about a book that I'd written, not to mention a personal narrative, I really wouldn't have believed you. I was a lawyer. I didn't even particularly love writing. Somebody I saw from years ago recently in Seattle said, but you didn't even like to write. And it's true, I must say. I let most of the brief writing go to my partners. But somehow when I stopped doing the day-to-day work of civil rights law, of fighting the government in court every day, I had enough time, a little time to reflect. And what I hit on was, I have a story to tell here, a story that really needs to be told. And I wanted to tell the story of Fred Hampton because even though it was 35 years later, it was the story and a person who had most affected me in my life. We probably all have people when we look back or when we come into a tough situation and we say, what would so-and-so do tonight? What would this person do in this situation? One of those persons for me was Wancho Donahue, the head of the Homeless Coalition. The other person was Fred Hampton, who I knew 35 years ago. So I often think in a tough situation, what's right to do? What would Fred Hampton do? And so I decided, well, this story needs to be told because he affected me so much. Maybe I can tell it in a way that it will affect other people. And so it had an advantage, I guess, over some people who write, and that, as one of my writing teachers at Bennington said, you were lucky you had a front row seat on history. And I did have a front row seat on history in the fact that I got to meet Fred Hampton, the Panthers. I lived through the 60s, and I was a lawyer for much of the movement. But another friend also said, you don't get any credit for living it, which means you got to write it, and write it in a way that hopefully people like it and want to read about it. Again, nevertheless, I had such a wonderful story to tell, actually 2 or 3 stories to tell. The first story is the story of Fred Hampton, which many of us know much more about his death than about his life. And I had the pleasure of being with Iberia and going down to Haynesville and being with Francis, his father, who passed away a year ago, and getting a feel for the family and getting a feel for the cousins and the people who knew Fred early on. And I heard stories about when he was 10 years old, Fred organized the neighborhood kids and brought them over for breakfast on Saturday morning because he knew some of them were hungry. And he cooked for all the neighborhood kids. He had his own Breakfast for Children program in Maywood when he was 10 years old. When Fred was young, he also had a big head, and people used to call him Peanut Head. So Fred decided that he wasn't going to be called Peanut Head, so he learned to be very good at repartee. And by the time he was 14 or 15, he was known as the King of the Nines. Nobody took on his mouth. And similarly, he had a lisp. And in order to overcome his lisp, he practiced oratory. And he particularly modeled himself after preachers. And he went to church to listen to preachers. And he also memorized all the speeches of Dr. King and Malcolm X. So it was no accident. He took what was could have been a deficit and overcame them and became a powerful speaker. And he could speak to welfare mothers, and he could speak to gang kids, and he could speak to law students. When Fred got older, he was in high school, he was a good football player, he was very likable, he was known for being a very sociable guy, but he wasn't content just to be popular. Fred, when he saw injustice, had to react to it. One of the first things he did, he noticed that black girls were not allowed to weren't considered to be homecoming queens at Proviso East. So he leads a walkout of the school over that. The next year, he's leading a walkout because there are no black administrators and very few black teachers there.